I thought it was an incredible meeting, great communication, great collaboration, and we all walked out of that room united. And that's the most important thing. Now the Prime Minister is going to go to work, get the legislation passed, and we'll divvy it up. I described him today as Santa Claus. He's coming, and his sled was full of all sorts of stuff. Now he's taking off back to the North Pole. He's going to sort it out, and then he's going to call us. So, and we're building a short of Santa Claus is my big belly. I got to loan it to him.
June, and Prime Minister Mark Carney is Santa Claus, at least according to Ontario Premier Doug Ford.
Yeah, that First Minister's meeting in Saskatoon seemed like quite the love. And even Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, who normally doesn't try hard to get on Ottawa's nice list, she was saying things like this.
I would say I'm encouraged by the immediate change of tone that we've seen from recent months.
Smith is happy. Ontario's Doug Ford was literally singing "Love is in the air" walking into that meeting. But what's changed when it actually comes to getting these fast-tracked projects built?
We know what we have, and now we're going to build on it. Taking matters absolutely in our control. We're united. We're going to build together, and we're going to build for all. We're going to build for all Canadians. That's what came out of this meeting. Thank you very much.
I'm not sure whether Santa Claus answered the question there. I'm Catherine Cullen, host of CBC's The House.
I'm Daniel Thibeault, host of Radio-Canada's political show Les Coulisses du Pouvoir.
And I'm Jason Markusoff, producer and writer for CBC in Calgary.
And we have come together for A House Party, our weekly podcast diving into the big burning questions driving this new government. And this episode, we're asking, can Canada make Build Baby Build more than a slogan? Okay, so happy premiers, happy Prime Minister, industry enthusiasm, but what do you guys think about this question of whether we are moving beyond a slogan? Can Canada make Build Baby Build more than a slogan? Jason?
If there ever was a time, it feels like it's now. Like there's never been so much energy all hurtling towards actually making good on this. You have a Prime Minister who's dedicated to this and who has, a history of delivering on things. I mean, not politically, but he's been known to manage well in a crisis. You have a crisis that makes people want to build. You have this pressure from the states that we have to find new trading partners, be better trading among ourselves, have a more resilient economy. You have premiers all on the same page from the NDP all the way to the United Conservatives and Saskatchewan Party, all saying the same things. Often people who are more reluctant to build. You have NDP Premier Wap Kinew interested in bringing resources through the Port of Churchill. You have Francois Legault, to a greater extent than he's ever been, open to the idea of maybe some pipelines. Industry, of course, wants to build, baby, build. No, the climate change conversation is not as peaked in people's minds as it has been. It's not going to be easy. I think the one risk is, if there is one right now, is that expectations are sky high. So anything less than, hyper fast build, baby build, no interruptions, could be disappointing to a lot of people.
I think that's the main thing. I think the bar is so high, and people expect Carney and the premiers to make things happen so quickly that it's bound to be disappointing. And I agree with Jason on everything there. I've never seen Legault even be so open at the idea of a pipeline. If he gets something in return for it, and right now he sees that as a way for him to finance the hydro line that he needs between Newfoundland and Quebec for the additional power he wants to get from Churchill and Gull Islands. So, hey, there's money there on the federal table. Why don't I take that? And in exchange, I'll open up my mind to the idea of a pipeline in Quebec. That's the premier. I'd like to remind people that there's an election coming up in Quebec in a year now. Might not be there anymore. The next guy might not be so open at the idea of a pipeline. And There's an openness to it, and it's always the case until we look at the details. And when you start looking at the details and the path and where it goes through and the communities, it becomes a little more complicated. Another thing that I noticed this week, everyone was super happy. Everyone was super positive. The last time I saw a meeting like that where people were super happy and positive was in 2015 when Prime Minister Justin Trudeau back then invited all the premiers from the country to talk about climate change. And they all came out of the meeting super happy, thinking they would do great things together. And that lasted about 7 months. And so I think that there might be a bit of a window that Mr. Carney wants to take advantage of, because it's not going to be like that for
How much can you build in 7 months? The answer is not much.
I think the answer has to be that we don't know, and it's not clear to me whether we know whether Canada can make Build Baby Build more than a slogan. Do we have any better answer than we did in that meeting in Saskatoon? No. And here's a couple things that stick out in my mind. One, Dan, you talked about the idea that the bar is so high. You know who did build a very high bar? Who built that bar? Oh, Mark Carney, right? Yeah. He was the one who said we will need to do things previously thought impossible at speeds not seen in generations, right? So he is the one who has said this has to be unprecedented and extraordinary. I was in Saskatoon. It was a very strange day. The whole experience was a bit strange because the premiers go in, they're all in a really a good mood, but like there was this nervousness too. I think we were sort of joking around, Doug Ford saying love is in the air. I was saying the vibes are a little bit more second date, right? Where like the first date went really well and you kind of like this guy, but you don't know what's going to happen when you get around the table again.
I'm willing to go back. Okay, let's check him out.
Yeah, and but you're like, oh, it really feels like this could be a thing. Are we going to be able to build something beautiful together? Or is it going to turn out that when we get around the table, he's not who you thought he was? And in fact, your values don't really align all that well, and maybe this whole thing was just like not, but you still want him to like you. Like there really was a vibe with the premiers. I think there was this sort of nervous expectation. They feel a possibility, and it is an economic possibility. They feel that there is an ability for them to deliver things for the people in their provinces, right? Whether it is important new pieces of infrastructure, if you're talking about the north, it's bringing in more hydroelectricity, like things that people will go, heck yes, we needed this, for there to be more money there to get other things done that could go into healthcare, affordable housing, you name it. Then we sort of realized as they were behind closed doors that we weren't going to get any kind of actual list. It was this message was being delivered to us through PMO and whomever else. And then we started asking ourselves as journalists, like, well, then what are they actually getting done? And I think we really started to question it, but the premiers come out and they're feeling like the date went really well. They're just as happy as they were going in, and still with this sense that there was incredible possibility. And so I am trying to square the remarkable enthusiasm of the premiers and the Prime Minister's office in moving forward on this, and the fact that the progress is a bit hard to understand. Carney came out with these conditions, these principles that are going to drive this forward. And the idea is that's going to attract project pitches. You're going to start to see where the resistance is from, for instance, some First Nations leaders, because we know that there are at least a handful who are opposed to it. But you have groups like the AFN too coming out and saying we're a bit nervous about how all of this is going. Yeah, I'm still trying to make sense of this whole thing.
First of all, I don't think I've ever heard anyone talking about building infrastructure in such a sexy way. Congratulations.
Christia Freeland said internal trade was sexy. I'm bringing it to infrastructure.
I think once again, it's everyone's around, and I think the comparison is interesting and very right. Everyone around the table is willing to play and is curious. What can I get out of this for me, for my province? Why wouldn't I be open to talk to Carney right now? Since he sounds like the kind of guy that can make something happen for me. Now we're dealing right now with a banker who's now a politician who's trying to make things happen in a political environment in the way that he used to be able to make it happen in a business world. And he's going to figure out very, very, very quickly that it doesn't go as easy and as fast. And you've mentioned First Nation, the need to consult. It takes a few months, say years, at least a year, to sit down with everyone and figure out what exactly can be done. I think there's some stuff that's on the list, and we haven't seen the list. We've heard about high-speed train, we've heard about hydro lines, but when it will come to the power corridors, pipeline, I think this will get complicated because you need to consult, because it involves more than 1-2 provinces, and you'll need to get everyone on board, and because the political environment between now and then will change dramatically. There'll be elections, there'll be change in government in some provinces, there'll be opposition from big cities, from mayors, from groups, and that will make it very, very hard to build fast, I think.
So while Catherine was using the dating metaphor, I'm going to be the Jewish guy who extends the Santa Claus metaphor here. So he has this bag of goodies, but he's not opening it yet. He's not really like showing us all his gifts yet. He wants to be canny because you don't know what's going to be the first thing to be built. You don't really know. Although when he was pressed on that, so Stephanie Taylor from National Post asks him, "You're not showing us a list of projects," and Mark Carney looks down at the paper and just rifles off a list.
Well, the first thing, Stephanie, I can give you, if I may, lots of examples of those projects, which range from Grays Bay Port and Road, Churchill Port, the Pathways Alliance, Northwest Coast Oil Pipeline, Intertie Bay Nord, Ring of Fire, La Fosse du Labrador, Contrecoeur Terminal, and on. Now I've offended some of my members because we don't have enough time for me to go through all the projects. There is a long list of projects that bring the country together, diversify our markets, make us more resilient, create good jobs and growth, have very good prospects of Indigenous partnerships and beyond.
Can I just say the Jewish guy did a better job with the Santa metaphor than Premier Ford did?
Totally.
It was a very funny moment, but like Premier Ford, that's not how Santa Claus works. He doesn't go away with things and think about it.
There's a list, right? There's a naughty, nice list, I understand, from the songs.
Yeah, exactly. I think you're acing it. It's interesting. Someone did express to me the idea that, well, you don't want to come out and say, okay, here are I'm going to make up a number. They were all bringing in 5 projects, right? So let's say you give, I don't know, every province 2 or 3. So here are the 20, 30 plus projects that we are saying yes to, because then you're going to get a whole bunch of people's backs up. And I think certainly First Nations is a part of that. We talk about that in many ways. Many of those concerns are rooted in the environment, but there are environmentalist concerns that would exist outside of that. The idea is you sort of wave a big banner that says, okay, these are the kinds of things we're interested in. We're interested in an economic corridor to the Arctic. We're interested in a Western economic corridor that could include a pipeline. And then private industry starts to go like, well, I could see there's some money to be made here if this happens faster than it usually does. And you can start having conversations with people who would live in the area about what paths work, consulting people, bringing them on side. So that I would say is like the positive spin on this. I think we're still waiting to see if it works. One of the most fascinating parts when we talk about the enthusiasm, though, of the provinces has to be how Danielle Smith played this whole thing, both going into it and where she was coming out of it. So, Jason, what did you make of all of this?
David Cochrane, our colleague at Power and Politics, had her on in Saskatoon and was asking her, I've never seen you this encouraged. And she says, well, I haven't heard a prime minister talk about bitumen pipelines before. Mind you, the last guy bought one, but that's beside the point. In that list that Carney rifled off, he does say Northwest Coast Oil Pipeline. He is favorable towards expanding the pipeline capacity. And that's, I think, something that Danielle Smith has been waiting to hear from a Liberal leader for ages.
Well, the way she set the table going into this, right? Can you just talk a bit about that letter Absolutely. She sent and how she set this up?
She's prolific in her letter writers, a great epistolary relationship she has with all the leaders. She was saying that there are these 9, she calls them terrible laws, these energy regulations, including a plastic ban and oil emissions cap, that she needs repealed. And she wants pipelines every which way, northeast, south, or northeast, west. Otherwise, we're in a national unity crisis, which is, kind of shades of the old Quebec separatist knife to the throat, threats. But Carney seems like he's willing to play ball with some of it, that he thinks that these are positive infrastructure things. She makes a really interesting point, I thought, that of all these projects, the one that is most sure to bring a lot of money to Canada is oil. Oil, let's remember, is the largest export commodity Canada has to the U.S. by a long shot, and it is a huge driver of wealth. And she has these grand ambitions that not a lot of oil-producing jurisdictions in the world have to double oil production. And if you're going to expand oil production, what you need to do is ship it. And so pipelines are the obvious, and they're safer than rail. She also spoke what was interesting about a grand bargain, and that was, and I think, and Carney seemed to echo some of that discussion. And another project he mentioned was Pathways Alliance. What that is, that's a consortium of several major oil sands producers who want to build this big carbon capture project, but that costs tens of billions of dollars, and they're looking for some subsidy. But her argument is that if there is the guarantee that we'll be able to produce more of our product, ship it, and have what they call decarbonized barrels of oil, then they'll also be willing to put more money into building that very costly carbon capture project to make oil production far more closer to net zero, and thereby producing some of the cleanest or lowest emissions at the production end, oil and gas in the country. And it was really interesting to hear the extent to which Carney and Smith were on the same page on all this.
Question for you, Jason, because I was wondering that this week. We've talked about the list, five projects per province, but is there any way we can call that a success if there's no pipeline? Because it could be. It's a possibility. What if it doesn't happen? Other projects happen, but there's no pipeline.
Well, and I think the thing folks should know is there's no private proponent, right?
Yeah.
There's no company that's ready to build this
I was going to say, this is like that's the other thing that's holding this back. There are other projects like Churchill Port, other ones that there are companies that want to build that, or they're on the table. There are projects waiting on the list. What they're all dreaming of is a repeat of the Northern Gateway pipeline project, which was a pipeline project that was going to go from kind of northern Alberta through to northern BC. It was proposed in the Harper years. They tried to push it through. There was huge opposition from a lot of environmental groups and First Nations groups. Yeah. And it was struck down in court. When Trudeau came in, he wound up putting that to bed while still building and ultimately owning the Trans Mountain Pipeline, which went on a less contentious southern route to the Vancouver area before oil gets on tankers and everything. So to Dan's question, it was a really good question. I think there would be a lot of disappointment that wasn't a major project. Mm-hmm. That if they continued to find ways to block pipelines, I think that would be a real stymieing of one of the big potential export diversification proposals, and also economic generators in Alberta. And they always talk about how the steel is produced out east and the jobs in BC and et cetera, et cetera. So I think that would be a stressful thing. And look, Mark Carney and other provinces seem like they're in favor of it. I mean, and BC's NDP government, the premier wasn't there, the deputy premier was there in BC. They were saying that they're not necessarily opposed to it. They have to have a discussion about it, but they're saying, look, there's not even a proposal on the table yet.
Dan, I'm curious what you think of how Carney is handling particularly the challenge from Smith here.
Yeah. I was listening to Jason thinking, is the fact that there's no project on the table make it easier for him to go around and have this conversation, right? It's
100%.
It's super easy to say, no, I'm willing to look into that. It doesn't exist. There's nothing on the table, but I'm willing to look into it, and I'm willing to put my political weight in this fight if it comes up, and use my political capital to try to sway premiers along the route, possibly in Quebec or Ontario. Ontario seems to be okay with that, and probably BC a little more. There's got to be some work to be done with Premier Eby in BC, but there's nothing on the table. So while there's nothing on the table, it costs nothing to say, hey, this is something that we can totally talk about. He talks a lot about the high-speed train, which is an interesting project, but I don't think I wouldn't call that a national scale
building,
project. It works for Quebec and Ontario. That's pretty much it. Unless he throws in the line between Calgary and Edmonton, which has been, they've been talking about.
I'd write that.
Yeah. I was talking to Wab Kinew, the Premier of Manitoba, last week. The idea of expanding the port capacity in northern Manitoba is something that he likes a lot, and I think the feds like a lot. I think it all hinges on the capacity of Ottawa to bring everyone together, or the needed player at the right table to push some of those projects. I have doubts about the capacity to push the pipeline itself. And if tomorrow morning there's a company that comes and say, I'm willing to go ahead and build that, and the feds and Mark Carney says, I'm willing to push that forward and we'll make it happen, we'll start it within 2 years, I think it'll make a lot of provinces happy. I think it will shift the difficulties from the provincial levels to the cabinet levels. And I think at that point, he's going to have interesting conversation with progressists at the cabinet table. I'll start with Stephen Guilbeault.
Yep.
But there are others. I don't think Mr. Guilbeault is super willing to fast track the pipeline project in 2 years without the necessary oversights and all the process that he helped building in the previous government he was in.
The other thing that I'm curious about, so there's certainly the environmental perspective in all of this. What they did come out of this meeting with was these principles, these conditions. And one of them is that any project has to be a high priority for Indigenous leaders.
Yeah.
And so while Mark Carney has said, yes, a pipeline, and big asterisks, it has to be this decarbonized oil, and I want to better understand the relationship between
decarbonized oil. We need a company that was willing to build. There's a few asterisks.
And could some unicorns build it too? Is sort of my point, right?
Under some rainbows.
Like, has he? We talked about him setting the bar high for himself, but is he setting the bar so high in terms of this particular project that he will say, okay, in principle, I'm on side, but you folks couldn't meet the conditions that we set forward, and we all sat around the same table and said these were the conditions. I don't know, but then you have to ask, what does that mean for him too? I mean, Daniel Smith has done a masterful job of getting us all talking about this pipeline. Jason talked about, there's a reason for that. The economic benefit is so big. But if you are indeed greenlighting, and again, we don't know, 20, 30, we don't know, number of projects. If you say, well, we completed 25 of them and 2 or 3 just we couldn't make it work for any number of reasons, can you still sort of wave a flag of victory? Like, our principal question, can it be more than just a slogan? I'm sure they are going to build some of these things, but are they going to build the ones that are going to make the biggest economic difference? Are they going to be able to do it in a way that doesn't fundamentally undermine the relationship that Canada has with, particularly, we say Indigenous, but in this case, we really are talking particularly about some First Nations groups. And how does Canada's reputation as trying to be a thoughtful steward of the environment, and some people would maybe laugh at that reputation in the first place, but where does that land in all of this? And Mark Carney's too, Mr. Values,
So when it comes to oil pipelines, there's a reason that there's no proponent right now, and that's because there's a sense among builders that there's just no hope of getting one. First of all, to the whole Northern Gateway, Northern Coast one, you have this old Bill C-48 that bans tanker traffic of bitumen specifically through off the north coast of BC. So if you're actually going to do this Northwest Coast pipeline project, you're going to have to figure out, you have to repeal that or something like that. And that's something that Daniel Smith and others have been very clear on. But if the government seems to have to do all this front-end loading on this, they have to basically start clearing the obstacles and saying, we want to push this forward, we want to make a priority, we want to put our elbow into or shoulders into this. And that environment, that willing and enabling environment, will potentially get a company like one of the big pipeline companies to say, yes, we want to build that, not just the government. They were so discouraged by how Energy East fell apart, how Kinder Morgan had to sell its Trans Mountain project to the feds, how Northern Gateway fell apart in the fast. Catherine, I'm so glad that you talked about, when you were talking about First Nations, you were talking about the kind of diversity of opinions there, because I think that's important. That's always been the case, but I feel like it's more become the case now, that there's while the opinion across the Premier's table has changed, it's also the complexity and nuance of the diversity of opinions in First Nations community has also changed. They want to be at the table, certainly. More and more, they want to be at the table as equity partners. There was some of that in the past, but it's become much more of a discussion of economic reconciliation among First Nations leaders and among the premiers and other non-First Nations governmental leaders. They have these loan programs scattered throughout the country now to help them have equity in the project. And I think there's a widespread belief that if there ever would be a project like an oil or gas pipeline, they will have equity partners in oil and gas, and North Coast Gas Pipeline, I believe, has that as well. They're trying to sell the Trans Mountain Pipeline to First Nation partners. Yeah. So that will be one of the big things. I mean, if this is a project that will produce wealth for First Nations, isn't just, they're just like, we'll give you a rec center, just brush them off and stuff like that. Then I think we are in a different conversation, and that seems to be when Mark Carney talks about partnerships on these projects. That's the sort of thing he's driving toward.
Catherine was mentioning the environmental reputation of Canada and the efforts that were made over the past decade to try to make Canada a green leader amongst countries around the world. Saskatoon was under and is still under heavy forest fire right now, and flames have reached the community of La Ronge, where I've had a chance to go 20 some years ago. It's a huge thing. It's a huge thing in northern Alberta, a huge thing in Manitoba as well. Do people look at that while thinking about building a pipeline and do like a bit of a this plus this or this equal this, or do I need to think a little more about this? I don't know. I asked myself that question this week as I was watching both the political coverage and the forest fire coverage.
It was interesting in Saskatoon because while your weather apps were telling you that there was an air quality warning, the sky was blue. Like it's true. There are many. Like I'm not in any way trying to minimize the situation in Saskatchewan. And
Saskatoon you're about 3 hours away from 4 hours away from where it's really happening.
But I think there would be something very powerful to the idea that these leaders were meeting and actually like visibly sort of under the cloud of this smoke. That was not the situation. Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe got asked about this in the lead up to the meeting about making sense of the fact that there are all these fires burning, that climate change obviously has a relationship to the number of forest fires, how long they burn and whatnot. He pushed back by saying, well, 90% of the fires in the province right now are man-made. So we're not talking about climate change. Now, I think you can obviously have a discussion about how long burning these fires are because things are drier because of climate change. But he said, well, they're man-made. And let me tell you about all the efforts we are making in Saskatchewan to produce a product that burns cleaner. He talked about a couple projects that are apparently not ones I was aware of, but which he says are net zero, a couple of like locations within the province. So he and you could see he didn't like the question very much.
No,
either.
Probably not.
But they keep insisting, well, we want to talk about climate change too. That's why we're talking about decarbonized barrels of oil. The juxtaposition of these two things, this wildfire season happening at the same time as we're talking about producing more oil, is fascinating. The conservative response time and time again is we should use our oil to displace dirtier forms of pollution in other parts of the world. And I don't think that conversation is going anywhere. That's the proposition conservative leaders are making, and Canadians are going to have to decide whether they are comfortable with that.
Tim Hodgson said the same thing, the new energy minister, when he came to Calgary to speak to the Chamber of Commerce a few weeks ago. He was using that same language, which was very, very interesting to hear. I mean, the local crowd lapped it up. This is where there's a disconnect. This is one of the big challenges of Build, Baby, Build, and especially when it comes to the big contentious oil pipelines. That when people talk about net zero obligations in other provinces outside of Saskatchewan, Alberta, they often talk about it as a moral imperative for healthy living, for our future. In Alberta, when you hear Daniel Smith or Scott Moe talk about it, it's more about the cost of doing business and the trade-off, which is why the grand bargain in Daniel Smith's rhetoric doesn't include we all have a much safer future. It's more about being able to produce our products. So there is a disconnect, and that is going to be a challenging thing for Mark Carney and his team, and even around his cabinet table, to convince that these are worth it, and that we'll be better off if we can produce them at a lower carbon level. I mean, some people joke about decarbonized oil and gas. It is a big barrel low carbon. It is somebody joke that compare decarbonized oil and gas to a filtered cigarette, because of course you can produce no carbon emissions while you extract it and ship it, but what happens at the end? Still, you burn it. Mm-hmm. So there is that awkward situation. But again, I think that they're maybe being cynical, but they're taking advantage of this period in our lives when, because of pressing economic concerns and tariff issues and other things, that climate change just isn't as front of mind for people until their skies are orange from forest fire.
Oof. Okay, so Dan, where does this discussion go now?
There's going to need to be a bill table. I think Mark Carney said at some point that he was hoping to adopt it before July 1st. It's not going to happen. No way, no chance. Unless he found some loophole in the parliamentary process that I'm not aware of. I don't know how you can table a bill within the next week and make it a law by going through House, Committee, Senate, before royal assent.
Fast-tracking the fast-tracking?
Yeah. And adopt, baby, adopt. I don't think...
Doesn't have the same ring to it.
I don't think we're going to go...
Bill, baby, Bill. Bill, baby, Bill.
Bill, baby, Bill. I think ideally they'll want to table something before July 1st. And then what I'm going to be looking for is the way they're shaping that, the little compromise that are going to be included in the bill, and the list of project. I want to see that list of project and see what makes who happy, when, where, and where that can take us and how fast. But as we said earlier, he set the bar super high, and it's going to be one hell of a challenge to breach it at this point, I think.
If I can just offer one very quick closing thought here, which is it is fascinating to think of Donald Trump, the guy who pulled out of the Paris Accord in his first time as president. He is either going to pull Canada further away from its environmental objectives. At that point, it was still Justin Trudeau's Canada, and he was, Mr. Green, Mr. We're going to fight climate change. So either he succeeds in pulling Canada further away, or Canada under Mark Carney succeeds in showing that you can walk and chew gum at the same time and finds a way to do all of this and still meaningfully take into account environmental concerns, puts more of an emphasis on clean projects. We don't know which way it's going to go, but what a fascinating moment to think about. Okay, guys. Well, listen.
Hey, before we go, can I tell you about an email we got this week, which I thought was really cute.
Please.
So glad you're keeping the party going. All right. Whenever I hear the music, I see you, Catherine, dancing on the shag carpet, martini glass in hand, Danielle sitting on the couch in a smoking jacket, and Jason over at the record player picking out the next jazzy tune. Sheila English who wrote that. So you know what?
That's a lot of fun.
I'm gonna just take a little break and go stir you, not shake you because that would be offensive. Stir you a nice martini. You can go dance.
If you insist.
I'm gonna wait.
Can you make two, please?
Sounds good.
Okay, that is it for House Party this week. Thanks, as always, to my co-hosts and dance partners, Jason Markusoff and Daniel Thibeault. And thank you to our jazzy production team, Caitlin Crockard, Jennifer Chevalier, and Carla Hilton. Be sure to give us a follow in the podcast feed for The House so you can catch both House Party and my other show, The House, every week. 2 shows, 1 feed. What a deal. The House will be with you on Saturday, and House Party will be back next Wednesday with another big, burning political question.